I'm sitting here in Bristol, about a mile from where the Colston statue fell just over 6 weeks ago now. And it feels like a good place to do some thinking with you about finding your question at the start of this programme. You might be itching to get out, to make work again, and to be wanting to think about new contexts and new conditions in which that work might take flight. You might have adapted your learning resources to support your visitors and audiences remotely and be wondering how those relationships might have changed during this period. You might be wanting to respond to the rapid acceleration of social justice initiatives over lockdown and wondering what that means for the future of programming and your artistic vision. And these questions might feel really enormous, raised in an uncertain context in which it feels like we're all scenario planning on sand. So what's a method that we could use to hone that question you want to explore over these 4 weeks? I want to briefly tell you a story. About 2 years ago, I took on the directorship of Arnolfini, Bristol's International Centre for Contemporary Arts, at a moment of severe crisis for the organisation. Its funding was about to be withdrawn by Arts Council England, and despite having a 60-year history, like many of our theatres right now, it faced almost certain closure unless a solution could be found. Initially, the most obvious question you might ask in that situation in order to figure out how to save Arnolfini would be how to devise a business model for an arts organisation which was then 75% reliant on public subsidy, but whose overheads were just spiralling. And it's true that one bit of the answer lay in an ambitious commercial vision and a new partnership with the University of the West of England to diversify its funding and shoulder the heavy weight of a very expensive building. But there was another question we needed to ask in order for Arnolfini to survive and come out the other side of recovery. It was clear that Arnolfini's future success, commercially and artistically, lay in its capacity to understand its context and to connect with its city. So the question that we wanted to ask, alongside the question of its business model, was if the greatest risk to Arnolfini is to be irrelevant, how can it understand what it means to be relevant to visitors and residents of Bristol, to artists locally and internationally? To answer that, I used a technique that we had developed with the team at the producing company Situations over many years, where we worked almost entirely outside cultural venues, often in the public realm. The technique was to think about place as a multi-dimensional set of conditions from which arts emerge and through which culture grows. This 360-degree look at place involves getting under the skin of a place to ask, firstly, when? What do we know about the histories of this place? And how does that impact on people now? What has been hidden and suppressed? Whose stories are we listening to? And what might it mean to be producing in this context at this time? Also crucially in there was an idea around duration and time. How does this place, this when of this place, function? In the early morning, in the middle of the day, in the evening, differently seasonally, and at different times of the week. Secondly, where? What is the character of this place in relation to other locations? What's its topography? What's its official identity and its undercurrent? How is it thought of differently? For example, a tourist view versus a resident's view? And what kinds of cultural identities collide here? And lastly, who? What is our role in amplifying or connecting with the different networks of people here? And what are their aspirations and their disappointments? What are their gathering points and their go-to ways of expressing themselves? And who are we missing? Now, at Situations, these questions, this kind of fieldwork, if you like, were asked in the making of new place-based arts projects. So, of course, we were undertaking a kind of archaeology of places in that case. But you can use these 3 questions, I think, these 3 techniques, to narrow your focus when the challenge feels insurmountable. When you want to question how to be more relevant, asking when, where, and who as a starting point can be a good place to start. So at Arnolfini, we asked when. What does it mean for Arnolfini to be reflecting the conflicting history of Bristol and Britain at this point in 2017? And Grace and Perry's exhibition was the first test of how to pick up on a public mood. Where, what might it mean for Arnolfini to be just a few feet away from the Colston statue and the harbour? Bristol Old Vic had done just that with its Year of Change, recognising that it is a theatre in one of the UK's most segregated cities. And finally, who? At Arnolfini, we had to ask who felt the Arnolfini was for them. What if the old model of an exhibition venue was no longer relevant? So we tested new social spaces, new ways of reallocating our resources to take on a civic role, new ways of moving from performance to exhibition to reading and socialising across different spaces. We tested out how we worked across the city, outside of the building's walls. And we learnt from Watershed, just across the water, how you could operate a thriving hub of activity because it understands its spaces to be social and not just about display. And we learnt from Knowle West Media Centre and MIMA and Battersea Arts Centre to make the organisation porous, less a building and more an engine of ideas reflecting Bristol's ingrained sense of independence and experimentation. That refining of when, where and who enabled us to get a grip on relevance from 3 perspectives, so that our feet were firmly embedded in place, but looking out, not in. I hope this has given you some sense of a different perspective on how to approach on finding your question as you embark on the next bit of this programme, and look forward to hearing from you soon.